Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 5th of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by giving us a call at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. You can always find this information online at weather.gov/Alaska, and following this show, you'll be able to see all of these images on our website. Simply look for the TV desk icon at the bottom of the pages, whether you're heading to Juneau, Fairbanks, Anchorage, or the weather.gov/Alaska page. You'll be able to find an easy route to those TV images. And if you can't find what you need, you're struggling to find some more information about something you're really interested in weather-wise around Alaska, whatever the case may be, let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov. I'm happy to help. Here's a look at what's going on across the region tonight. Across the Brooks Range, at least through tonight and midnight in the western Brooks Range, winter storm warnings continue there for snowfall totals that could reach, in isolated cases, upwards of 7 inches. For the eastern Brooks Range, this will mainly go until 6 o'clock in the morning. There could be higher totals in this range, maybe up to 10 inches in a few spots. Otherwise, about 4 to 7 should do the trick. Down the road in the Dehne region, west of the Parks Highway, could be looking at about 4 to 7 inches of snow there. And we're also watching for high winds to develop as we get into tomorrow afternoon and evening. That'll be Monday. High winds may gust up to 75 miles per hour through the Valdez area, so we'll be watching that. A high wind watch is posted for Monday afternoon and Monday evening. Let's get on to the maps. The satellite picture throughout today has shown one fast-moving wave of snow working through the interior. Snow has been ending from west to east, and you can even see some clearing sky across south and western Alaska. Another wave building out here across the western Bering. But the next thing to watch will be a developing area of low pressure that will rapidly intensify here across the central and eastern Gulf, and storm force winds are expected to develop. Now, if you recall yesterday, we were talking about some divergence that we were seeing here across the eastern Gulf, and that's where the winds were kind of parting company, allowing low pressure to build in and bubble up in its place. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing that low going to develop as we head into the next 24 hours. That's going to mean some pretty strong winds and high seas along the central and eastern sections of the Gulf, the coastal waters of southeastern, probably some gales for most of the inner channels there. So tomorrow is going to look a whole lot different if you're watching from southeast again this evening and again tomorrow. And across the west, one more front is following the current wave of low pressure that's across the eastern parts of the interior and the eastern Gulf, now only at around 1,009 to 1,012 millibars. High pressure behind that sitting at 1,033 millibars, and you can see that's pushing in a considerable amount of northerly winds across the region. But out to the west, strong southerlies are already building in, bringing rain back to Shemya and Attu at 995 millibars. That low will continue passing to the east and deepen even more to about 975 during the overnight hours. High pressure sitting across the upper Noatak and Kobuk valleys there at 1,033 millibars will pretty much stay in place, but look at the response we get out of the low in the central Gulf, down to 980 millibars. This low was just going to sit here and kind of slosh around the eastern Gulf for just a little while longer, helping to draw in colder air across the western Canadian provinces. But the tight pressure gradient that we see here will continue to bring in some very strong south and southeasterly winds across the outer coast and really allow the seas to build. You'll see that here coming up in the marine segment in just a little while. A lot of the rain's going to stay offshore. You'll see some of those clouds creeping into Prince William Sound and probably just grazing Kodiak Island during the overnight hours. But as we get into the daytime during Monday, this whole system is pulling off to the south and east, and we keep that tight pressure gradient across south central. That's exactly why that high wind watch has been posted for the Valdez area. Showers of snow continue across across the central and eastern Alaska range. Again, this should allow the snow to gradually wind down after midnight around the Denali region and west of the Parks Highway. As we get into southeastern Alaska, notice that pressure gradient is really tight across the outer coast here, and the inner channels really aren't that much protected at all. So strong gales are certainly a possibility as we go through the daytime tomorrow. High pressure is moving eastward across the international border at 1,033 millibars. Watch for areas of light snow and some fog up north, but the stronger southerly winds again will be building back in. With that comes more heat and probably a reduction of any sea ice that you've seen accumulate across the coast in recent days. Out across the west, the frontal boundary working in quickly across the Bering will make its way ashore by Tuesday afternoon. That means another surge of cooler air for the region, clouds, and certainly some snow chances developing from the YK Delta north of Cape Newingham all the way into Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and most of the Chukchi coast. Low pressure will still hover near the Beaufort Sea coast, but the risk for snow will probably be a little bit further west than that. What happened to our storm in the central and eastern Gulf? Well, it's still dropping southward. It's still holding at around 983 millibars. You'll see a trough of low pressure moving away from the Valdez area. The pressure gradient should relax as we get into Tuesday afternoon. High pressure is also moving east, but that's going to keep a pretty tight gradient right here across southeastern Alaska. And that means you're going to be in for another windy day. And that means conditions offshore and along the shore and across the inner coast. It's going to be pretty rough, it looks like, still through Monday and Tuesday. So hold on to your hats and all that good stuff. Out across the west, around the Gulf of Anadyr, a 996 millibar low there hovers at just to the west of St. Lawrence Island. The trough of low pressure swinging through will keep precipitation going and things fairly unsettled, but you'll notice the pressure gradient remains not quite as tight as what we see over southeast, but tight enough. Winds will be moving through the Bering Sea and through the Aleutians as high pressure is well to our south in this case, and colder air will be in charge as we head through Tuesday. We'll take a look at those Tuesday temperatures in a minute, but let's back up a little bit more toward Monday morning. Tonight's low temperatures across southeast, upper 20s and lower 30s for most areas there across the outer coast, just a hair above freezing around Sitka up toward Haines and Gustavus. You're looking at temps just around 32 degrees or so. Capital City in the upper 20s, down toward Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock in the lower 30s. Prince William Sound also just a hair above freezing for most locations there. Kodiak near 39. For the central interior, you're looking at lows back in the lower teens. 5 for Fort Yukon, 2 degrees for Bettles, -2 for Arctic Village, and teens and 20s for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound temps in the 20s and 30s. Norton Sound temperatures back in the mid-20s. And around Bristol Bay, look for overnight lows in the teens and low 20s there. A little bit warmer for the Alaska Peninsula, lower to mid-30s and 40s for the chain. South Central in the mid-20s tonight. High temperatures tomorrow will likely hover in the lower to mid-teens for most of the upper Yukon and the upper Tanana Valley, 23 around Fairbanks. Southeast, you're in the 30s to about 40 degrees. South Central, mid-30s for many locations. Prince William Sound down toward Kodiak Island in the lower to mid-40s. Southwestern locations in the lower 30s, with Nome looking at 35, Kotzebue at 27, and Barrow near 26. On to Tuesday morning now. Look at the cold and the effects of high pressure there, anywhere from 0 to -2 to -10 around Fort Yukon and Arctic Village. Southeast, you're in the 20s and 30s again. A lot of wind still moving through there. 20s and 30s for Prince William Sound, low 20s for South Central, including Matanuska and Susitna Valley locations and the Kenai. 34 around Kodiak, 20s and 30s for the YK, 30 in Nome and Savunga, and St. Lawrence Island, 33 degrees with St. Paul at 36. Highs on Tuesday will warm up a little bit more. You're looking at teens and 20s in most interior locations there. McGrath, 27, and Southwest, expect Bethel closer to 32. Port Hayden, Pilot Point, all the way down towards Sandpoint, anywhere from 40 to about 45 degrees. St. Paul and St. George, 43. Dutch Harbor in Alaska, 47, and upper 30s and lower 40s for a large part of southeastern Alaska, with the North Slope holding in the teens and 20s thanks to that building southerly flow as we go into the rest of the week.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather now, IFR conditions will continue around Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound and most of the Seward Peninsula and some of the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. As winter weather continues to move from west to east, we'll see snow flying in the morning across the eastern parts of the interior, and MVFR will be spreading a little bit further south as we go through the rest of the day as a storm system sits across the central and eastern Gulf. Watch for turbulence as a main issue with this. Out across the west, a band of IFR is expected to reach over Adak and Atka in the central Aleutians as a frontal boundary is slowly creeping eastward. You can see it moving into St. Matthew there by the afternoon. IFR conditions are expected to develop across some of the higher terrain of southeast and central and southern parts of the Panhandle as we get into Monday afternoon. And again, more clearing developing across the north and western Gulf, with MVFR improving across the upper Yukon and the upper Tanana valleys. IFR still hovering across the eastern Alaska range. And look for IFR south of the Brooks Range into Kotzebue Sound region and the Koyukuk Valley as well. MVFR conditions there expected across the Beaufort Seacoast for Monday afternoon. That should improve by Tuesday morning. MVFR still lingering across southeast, spreading a little bit further northward as we get into Tuesday morning. IFR across some parts of the southern inner channels there and misty fjords. IFR conditions across Kotzebue Sound and the interior of a large part of the Seward Peninsula, and there's that band of IFR still getting strung out there across the morning hours. That pushes eastward a little bit more by the afternoon. MVFR is still hovering over southern southeast and the central inner channels, and MVFR conditions expected from Kotzebue Sound all the way down through the YK Delta, Sand Point, and just about westward False Pass and Cold Bay, and a new system develops out in the west, starting to push more IFR into the western chain. Here's your pass conditions in detail now. Anactivik Pass for your Monday should see improvement all day long, but a start at IFR there, and for Adigan Pass is expected on Monday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be A-OK visibility and ceiling wise. We'll call it VFR for now, and for Rainy Pass as we start on your Monday. Windy Pass expected to see marginal conditions to start, but VFR conditions developing there, and for Isabel Pass, but perhaps a little bit of a lower start for Isabel as we get into your Monday. Mentasta Pass probably holds at IFR to start your day and last through your day. Tanita Pass, we expect to see improvements there toward VFR conditions, and for Portage Pass, likely VFR conditions, but again, the winds, especially on the outside of the sound, may be a lot stronger, so watch that. And Chilkoot and White Pass expected to start at IFR, but expected to see some improvements as the day goes on. Here's a look at freezing levels now, and out across the west you can see the surface freezing line cutting through the Aleutians, but a lot of cold air is filtering its way in and through the inside in the interior of Alaska. Warm air is leaving the eastern Gulf. Those levels now up to about 4, 6, even 8,000 feet as that storm system is moving south and east, and warmer air has infiltrated the Bering Sea and the central Aleutians. Those levels up around 8 to 10,000 feet, but the bulk of the state is below that 2,000-foot freezing level. Icing potential is improving, let's say, across the interior. You can see isolated moderate possibilities here across the upper Tanana and the upper Yukon valleys and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. The majority of the focus for any icing threat will be across southeastern Alaska as low pressure and a storm system is sitting across the eastern Gulf. Most of that will be generally above 4,000 feet. And much higher levels exist out across the west where that warmer air is moving in. Here's a jet stream, and that powerful low pressure system tomorrow in the Gulf will be driven by an upper level low. And once again, you can see this very large scale blocking pattern, that upside down U shape or even omega shape, if you're talking about the Greek alphabet, would have this kind of slowing the weather patterns down a little bit. And you can see the wind speeds there anywhere from 115 to 150 knots. The bulk of the flow across Alaska, though, is more of a northerly flow right now, and that means colder weather is on the way. A little bit lower down at 9,000 feet, here's our low pressure system, and strong winds coming in from the east and southeast, 30 to 40 knots. Northerlies pretty much from Barrow all the way down toward Kodiak Island, anywhere from 30 to about 55 knots. High pressure angling the flow in a little bit more from the west and the south across the Bering Sea. Wind speeds over St. Matthew and St. Paul about 65 to 70 knots. Low pressures in the same old spot at 3,000 feet. Much stronger winds here at lower levels. South and easterlies 50 to maybe 60 knots in some places. North and northeasterly winds coming over south central at 40 to 45. Slightly slower wind speeds across the upper Koyukuk Valley there, and then southerlies take over once again, 50 to 75 knots out west. So turbulence is really going to be focused across southeastern Alaska as we go ahead into the next several days there as low pressures moving eastward. This should improve on Tuesday, but for right now, don't be surprised to see widespread considerable moderate and some areas of isolated severe below 4,000 feet and considerable moderate across south central, southwest, and the western end of the Seward Peninsula.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the Sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the Sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane, about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the Sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the Sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of today's sea ice edge, and you can see very little changes across the Beaufort seacoast there. There has been a little bit of growth just north of Prudhoe Bay out toward Kaktovik. However, significant warmer air is moving northward, and with that and southerly winds moving up the Chukchi coast, any ice that's in place right now still stands a chance of being eaten up or just moved away, at least for the time being. We're still watching ice growth across some of the upper ends of the bays there, and for the very latest information anytime, you can head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice and check on the mapping, concentration, and the outlooks from our web portal site there. Let's take a look at southeast now, and you'll notice northerlies are picking up tomorrow. Low pressure is strengthening offshore, becoming a storm force system there as we get into Monday. A strong easterly flow moving through with storms and gales all across southeast, 19 to 20 foot seas across the outer coast. You're looking at 5 to 11 foot seas across the inner coastal areas with gusts up to about 40 knots. And across the northern Gulf, 35 knots with 14 to 15 foot seas. As we get into Tuesday, a little bit of improvement, but the gusts get even stronger though. Notice the strong easterlies, 45 knots with a 20-foot sea, 25-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance, and north and easterly winds through the inner channels coming up 30 to 35, seas 7 to 8 feet. They're gusts to 50 and 50 knot sustained winds across the northern Lynn Canal. Again, there will be some strong and gusty winds throughout the entire period, Monday and Tuesday, for just about every part of southeast. For south central, northerlies are strengthening inside of Prince William Sound, 7-foot seas there. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, 35 to 40 knots with 14 to 16-foot seas west of the Barrens, east of the Barrens, slightly smaller seas and lower winds from the north and northeasterly direction. As we get into Tuesday, calming conditions with 10 to 20 knot winds in Cook Inlet, and you're looking at about 10 to 12-foot seas there inside or outside of Prince William Sound. Inside, 10 knots with a 2-foot seas expected there on Tuesday. For Monday, inside of Bristol Bay, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Northerlies on either side of Kodiak Island with seas as high as 15 feet and sustained winds up to 45. A little bit lighter winds as you move down the Pacific coastline. 7 to 11-foot seas. The gusts could be strong upwards of 50 knots there between AKwx, Castle Cape, and out toward Chignik there for your Monday. By Tuesday, you can see a little bit of a change in the weather pattern. Getting light southerlies inside of Bristol Bay with seas down to 1 foot, 9 to 13 foot seas there on the Pacific coast, and northwesterlies easing up a bit across Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knots, 2 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, and 13 foot seas east from Kodiak to AKwx. On Monday, look for southerlies across the central and eastern chain, west and southwesterlies across the western end, 12 to 13 foot seas there, much higher seas as you move out into the north and western Bering. South and easterlies, 20 to 25 with 5 to 9 foot seas expected, 10 foot seas south of the central Aleutians on Monday. As we get into Tuesday, notice the winds are picking up a little bit more from the south and west, 20 to 30 knot winds with 9 to 13 foot seas in the west, looking for more of a south and westerly flow north of Nikolsky and Unalaska, and northwesterlies south of the eastern chain, 7 to 8 foot seas are expected on Tuesday. For the west coast, southeasterlies up in Norton Sound, you'll notice a strengthening flow north of Nunivak Island all the way out to St. Matthew and down to the Pribilofs, where the winds will range around 30 knots with a 10 foot sea, 23 foot seas though around St. Matthew on that 45 knot wind. Look for winds to shift more to a southwesterly direction as that ridge moves just a little bit eastward. Southerlies inside of Norton Sound, south and westerlies around the Pribilofs coming into Cape Newenham up to Nunivak Island, 20 to 25 with 6 to 9 foot seas there on Tuesday. And for the North Slope, look for the strongest winds across the Chukchi Coast and the highest seas there as well. 4 to 13 foot seas in the region north of St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait. You can see 19 foot seas on a southeasterly wind at 40. Southerlies remain light in the ice-free waters, 2 to 3 foot seas with 10 to 15 knot winds there in the Beaufort Seacoast. And as we get into Tuesday, strengthening south and easterly winds for the Beaufort and continued strong southerlies across the Chukchi Coast, 7 to 14 foot seas there with winds around 30 to 35 knots, with improvement though around St. Lawrence Island. That's Tuesday. A quick recap of tonight's weather shows that low pressure is strengthening across the central and eastern Gulf. This will bring strong winds to a large part of southeast with gales and storm force winds across the inside passages and the outer coast for storm force winds there. A high wind watch is posted around Prince William Sound, especially around the Valdez area, I should say, for gusts upwards of 75 miles per hour. Winter weather advisories around the Denali National Park region and west of the park's highway will be winding up tonight as snowfall begins to end, and winter storm warnings for the Brooks Range will be winding down between midnight and 6 a.m. tomorrow with some snowfall totals reaching upwards of 7 to maybe as high as 10 inches in some cases. Another strong push of weather moving across the Bering Sea will be the next weather maker moving into the west coast as we head into Tuesday, bringing a widespread area of rain and snow, and wind continues in southeast. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.